The auction terminal flickered in the dim light of Corin Hale's cabin, its cracked holodisplay humming like a tired insect. Across the endless grid of abandoned colonies and forgotten outposts, one name caught his eye: Damaris, 9, status, derelict, uninhabited, transferable. The price beside it was almost an insult to its own existence: 100 credits. A place once meant for hundreds of lives, traded now for less than a night's rent in orbit. Corin stared at it, thumb hovering over the confirmation glyph. He didn't need a reason to go there. The reason was the silence it promised. He confirmed the purchase with a gesture. The transaction blinked green: ownership transferred. The AI clerk congratulated him in a hollow voice, as if it too couldn't believe anyone would buy such a place. Moments later, the deed packet arrived, encoded and authenticated. The coordinates appeared as a soft blue point in the dark. Damaris, 9, a world that had once been a hub of agricultural production for the Perseid colonies before the soil turned acidic and the atmosphere unpredictable. He'd read about it once, in the days when he still cared about things like progress and trade. Now he cared only about distance. 2 days later, the shuttle descended through the red haze of the planet's upper atmosphere. The hull rattled like a dying creature, buffeted by electrical crosswinds that licked the metal with blue light. The autopilot's voice murmured telemetry as Corin stared out the viewport. The planet stretched below in rust and shadow, vast plains of cracked earth veined with dry riverbeds that shimmered faintly with embedded metallic dust. Ruins appeared in clusters, domes split open, wind turbines half buried, and towers bent under the weight of their own corrosion. It was beautiful in a way only forgotten things could be. He landed in the middle of what the data grid identified as Outpost Theta, a ghost town that had once served as the colony's central hub. The shuttle doors opened with a slow hiss, exhaling air that smelled faintly of ozone and decay. His boots crunched against the desiccated soil. The air was breathable, though laced with metallic tang. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted in bands of orange and crimson. Silence pressed against his helmet until it felt like a living thing. The buildings around him were bones of civilization, skeletal frameworks of habitation domes, storage tanks collapsed in on themselves, skeletal towers whose surfaces glittered with sand-infused glass. He activated the visor overlay. Thermal scans showed no major heat signatures. Radiation levels low. No life signs. The kind of silence that could swallow years without changing. Perfect. He set up camp inside what used to be a hydroponics facility. The structure had partially collapsed, but its sublevel remained sealed and intact. He reactivated the lights with a small fusion cell, coaxing flickers of illumination through the dust-choked air. Inside, forgotten machinery lined the walls: nutrient tanks, growth pods, the remnants of artificial vines that had long since fossilized. He unpacked his meager supplies: a recycler unit, water filters, and a portable fusion generator. Within an hour, a low hum filled the chamber. The sound of energy returning to a place that had long forgotten it. As night fell, he stepped outside. Damaris 9's twin moons rose together, pale and uneven, casting long silver shadows through the ruins. The air grew colder, sharp enough to sting his lungs. Static murmured faintly in the wind, the ghostly residue of old transmission arrays still alive somewhere out there. Corin turned toward the distant hills, where a faint shimmer pulsed and disappeared. Probably the remnants of an old power relay discharging. He made a note to investigate once daylight returned. Sleep came fitfully. His dreams were thick with fragmented sounds. Voices layered beneath static, machinery breathing, the whisper of footsteps just beyond perception. Once, he woke to the soft crackle of the comm receiver, though he had turned it off. The lights flickered. For a long time, he sat awake, listening to the faint rhythm of something, too steady to be wind, too irregular to be mechanical. But when he stepped outside, there was only silence, the empty expanse glinting under twin moons. At dawn, he began exploring the perimeter. His boots left the first new tracks in the dust in decades. He found collapsed habitation pods half swallowed by sand, their glassy windows broken inward. Inside one, a faded mural still clung to the wall, a depiction of the early settlers, smiling beside alien crops that never took root. The irony wasn't lost on him. Human ambition, reduced to dust and forgotten artistry. By the third day, Corin began mapping the underground network of tunnels. Many were unstable, some filled with stagnant air and decayed circuits. In one passage, his light caught something unexpected, a pattern etched into the wall. Not human script. The lines curved in elegant, flowing arcs that shimmered faintly under his beam, as though the material itself resisted time. He traced a finger along one groove. It pulsed faintly, like the dying heartbeat of a machine. The translator implant in his cortex failed to recognize the symbols. He backed away slowly. The last survey reports hadn't mentioned any non-human presence. Perhaps they never looked deeply enough. That night, while cataloging his findings, the soft hum returned, distinct now, almost rhythmic. It came from beyond the settlement's edge, where the dunes rose like frozen waves. He followed it with his scanner, which fluctuated between readings, energy signatures that appeared, vanished, then multiplied. His breath fogged the inside of his visor as he climbed the ridge. Below him, in a hollow carved from the sand, the source revealed itself. A faint light glowing beneath a half-collapsed dome. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Corin hesitated. His hand went instinctively to the plasma pistol on his belt. The wind carried a low sound, something between a sigh and a melody. He descended slowly, each step sending ripples through the dust. When he reached the dome, the air around it seemed warmer, subtly alive. He brushed away layers of sand from the entrance hatch. The door resisted, then slid open with a shuddering groan. A wave of stale air and faint ozone washed over him. Inside, the chamber was dim but intact. Strange crystalline filaments lined the walls, glowing faintly in pale blue. And at the center stood a figure. For a moment, he thought it was a reflection, a trick of light. Then it moved. Tall, slender, draped in fabric that shimmered like liquid metal, its skin a lattice of faintly glowing veins. Two eyes, luminous and unblinking, fixed on him. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if recognizing him, or remembering something that once resembled him. Corin froze. The scanner at his wrist emitted a warning tone, life form detected, unknown classification. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. The being raised one hand, slow and deliberate, palm outward. Not a threat. A greeting. Behind her, in the shadow of broken machinery, something smaller moved, a childlike shape, watching with wide, reflective eyes. In that moment, Damaris, 9 no longer felt empty. The ghosts he had expected were not human after all. The silence between them was almost tangible, stretching across the broken chamber like a living thread. Corin felt his pulse hammer in his throat, though the figure before him made no move. The glow from her skin shifted subtly with each breath, the light ebbing and flowing in patterns too deliberate to be random. The child clung to the folds of her shimmering garment, its eyes, large, liquid, and utterly alien, fixed on him with an intensity that pinned him in place. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then she made a sound, soft and layered, like multiple voices braided together. His translator implant stuttered, blinked with confusion, and began parsing. Human, it whispered finally, in a voice not her own but translated from something older. You, return. Corin swallowed hard. Didn't know anyone was still here, he managed, his voice small against the hum of the room. The woman's head tilted, her copper-toned eyes narrowing slightly. They left. Long ago. But you come again. Why? I bought this place, he said, feeling absurd as soon as the words left his mouth. It's mine now. Something like amusement flickered across her face, an expression not entirely human, but close enough to be unsettling. Yours, she repeated slowly, as if tasting the concept. You claim dust and ruin. The wind owns more of this world than you do. Corin didn't argue. He holstered his pistol carefully, raising his hands to show no threat. I didn't come to take anything. I just wanted quiet. At that, her expression softened slightly, though her stance remained guarded. The child peered out from behind her, curious but wary. Its small fingers glowed faintly at the tips, bioluminescent traces that pulsed in sync with the mother's rhythm. Corin noticed that their breathing matched perfectly, two beings tethered in some biological harmony. He stepped further into the room, careful not to disturb the crystalline structures underfoot. They emitted faint sounds when he passed, resonant tones like the pluck of invisible strings. The walls were alive with faint circuitry, lines of energy flowing through them like veins. It wasn't human tech, though he recognized adaptive bioplasmic filaments, living architecture, grown rather than built. You shouldn't be here, the woman said quietly. This place sleeps. It remembers war. He glanced at her, scanning the chamber again. You're Iliari, he said, recalling fragments of history lessons, news feeds from decades ago. The Iliari, humanoids from the Marin Vale, who once served as translators and mediators during the first human expansion beyond Sol. Their cities had been works of living light and memory. Then came the border conflicts, the accusations of betrayal, and their slow disappearance from known space. Her gaze flickered, a subtle acknowledgement. That name is dead, she murmured. We were something else before you gave us that one. Corin hesitated. Then what should I call you? The translator paused as she spoke, struggling with tones it couldn't fully grasp. Sarai, it rendered finally. That word still means something. The child peeked out again, curiosity outweighing fear. And her? Corin asked, nodding gently. Lyra, Sarai said softly, with a faint smile that cracked the stillness of her expression. She has never seen another like you. Corin crouched down slowly, lowering himself to Lyra's height. I could say the same, he murmured, and the child tilted her head, fascinated by his voice. She reached out tentatively, touching the air before him. The faint bioluminescent glow extended toward his skin, reacting to his heat. Sarai's hand moved quickly, but not in anger, protective, cautious. She's curious, Corin said. She learns too fast, Sarai replied. Curiosity cost us everything once. He didn't press her, though questions burned inside him. How had she survived here, on a planet stripped bare and left for dead? What had driven her to stay when every other living thing had fled? He glanced at the dome's core, where a faint hum emanated. The power source was old, alien, but functional. He realized then, she'd kept it alive. The entire dome, sustained by her maintenance and adaptation. I can help, he said suddenly. The settlement above still has infrastructure. Power relays, old fusion cores. If I repair them, this place could run stronger. Safer. Her eyes narrowed again. You fix what you broke long ago. I didn't break it, Corin said quietly. But maybe I can keep it from dying completely. A long silence followed. Dust drifted in beams of soft blue light. Finally, Sarai stepped aside slightly, enough to let him near the central console. Touch nothing until I say, she warned. The system still remembers human access codes. They wake old ghosts. He nodded, stepping carefully toward the console. It was a blend of crystalline growths and metallic roots, pulsing softly with blue energy. His gloves brushed its surface, and a cascade of holographic patterns erupted into the air, strands of alien script and flickering fragments of human code, overlaid imperfectly. Somewhere within the confusion, he saw fragments of the colony's past, humans and Iliari working side by side before everything burned away. Sarai approached slowly, her hand resting on the console. Her glow merged with the light patterns, smoothing them. The town above still breathes, you said. Barely, Corin admitted. But I can bring it back. The air scrubbers, the hydro grid, the generators, they're old but recoverable. And if you bring it back, she said softly, others will come. Humans. They'll smell what you've rebuilt. They always do. Then we'll be ready, he said simply. Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she extended her hand. Her skin was cool and faintly textured, as though woven from fine metallic threads. When he took it, the translator flickered again, briefly catching the unspoken resonance between them. It didn't render words, only a single pulse of meaning, agreement. The light in the chamber dimmed, settling into a steady rhythm. Lyra had wandered closer, her small hand resting on her mother's leg, her gaze locked on Corin with something between wonder and recognition. The dome hummed softly, the sound deep and harmonic, as if acknowledging the bond that had just formed. When Corin stepped back into the night, he looked up at the twin moons and realized the silence had changed. It was no longer the stillness of death, but the breath of something beginning again. In the distance, faint lights flickered where no power lines should have been, spreading through the town like veins waking from a long sleep. The mornings on Damaris 9 were not like any Corin had known. The sunlight was filtered through a haze of fine metallic dust that turned everything a soft copper hue, as though the world was perpetually caught in the moment before sunset. Each dawn, he woke to the gentle thrum of the rebuilt fusion core, its steady pulse a reminder that life, however fragile, had begun again among the ruins. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dry minerals. He had set up his camp closer to the central square now, between two partially restored habitation domes whose glassy panels still bore the scars of long-ago storms. In the days following their first meeting, Sarai had appeared at the edge of his camp several times, never approaching until he acknowledged her, never staying long enough for the conversation to drift beyond practicalities. There was an unspoken rhythm between them, a pattern of cautious collaboration. She showed him the safe routes through the underground tunnels, the places where the old reactors had fused into glass from heat, the wells that still produced water when coaxed properly. He, in turn, repaired things she had forgotten how to mend: fusion regulators, magnetic couplers, atmosphere stabilizers. One morning, she brought Lyra with her. The child moved like liquid light through the ruins, curious about everything. Her fingers brushed against corroded panels, and wherever she touched, faint trails of luminescence bloomed, as though the town itself responded to her presence. Sarai didn't stop her. She listens to the world, she said when Corin noticed. The Eliari built their homes from living code. The old metals still remember. Corin had never heard anyone speak of technology as though it could remember. Yet, as he worked to reactivate the power grid, he began to believe her. The systems responded in ways no human design manual had prepared him for. Circuits adjusted themselves subtly to his input, currents flowing in spirals rather than lines. When he installed the new power conduits, the town pulsed faintly, lights flickering in patterns that seemed more biological than mechanical. Days merged into one another as they worked. Together, they repaired wind turbines, cleared solar panels, and reconnected the underground aqueducts that had once nourished fields now long dead. He showed Sarai how to interface human data ports with her crystalline conduits. She taught him to align frequencies by ear, not code, to feel the rhythm of the systems rather than measure it. Slowly, the ghost town began to hum again, the low and steady vibration of a world no longer resigned to decay. One evening, as the twin moons rose, Sarai joined him on the ridge overlooking the valley. They sat in silence for a long time, the wind carrying fine particles that glittered in the pale light. "This place was not meant to die," she said at last. "Your kind built too fast, too hungry. You cut too deep into the planet's crust to feed your machines. The soil turned against you, poisoned by the dust from the core. My people warned them, but humans do not listen to warnings." Corin nodded slowly. "We never do. We just build, burn, and rebuild again." "Why do you rebuild now?" she asked, turning to him. He hesitated, searching for words. "Because I don't know how to stop." She studied him for a long moment, and he thought he saw something soften in her expression, an understanding, or perhaps pity. "Then maybe that is why you are still here," she murmured. "To learn what it means not to build, but to grow." The next day, they began restoring the hydroponic systems in the old agricultural dome. The air inside was thick with the smell of rust and decay, but the infrastructure remained intact. Corin reactivated the nutrient lines while Sarai recalibrated the light arrays with her strange organic interface. Lyra wandered between them, leaving glowing footprints on the dusty floor. When the system came online, the dome filled with a faint hum, and thin threads of green light began to spread across the trays, artificial algae awakening after decades of sleep. It wasn't much, but it was life. Corin felt something shift inside him as he watched the faint green shimmer. For years, he had drifted from contract to contract, fixing things others had broken, leaving before the dust could settle. Here, for the first time, he wanted to stay and see something through. Damaris, 9 was no longer a refuge from the world, it was becoming its own fragile world, one that needed him as much as he needed it. But even as they worked, the past refused to stay buried. While scanning the upper levels for remaining power lines, Corin found an old relay tower half buried in the dunes. Its lights were dead, but its transmission array remained intact. He repaired it out of habit, connecting it to the restored grid. That night, when the winds were still and the sky clear, the tower came alive. A faint signal began to pulse into the void, an automated beacon, centuries old, now reborn. Sarai found him standing at its base, staring at the flickering light. Her voice was sharp with alarm. "What have you done?" "I only restored power." "It must have reactivated automatically." Her eyes glowed brighter than usual, her breath quickening. "You don't understand. That signal will be heard. Others will come." Corin felt a chill run through him. "There's nothing left here for them." "There's always something left," she said bitterly. "Machines, minerals, salvage. Or worse, they'll come for us." He shut down the transmitter immediately, severing the power link. But it was too late. Even a few seconds of transmission could travel light years. The thought hung heavy between them. In the following days, they worked harder, faster, as if preparing for something neither of them would name aloud. The lights in the town burned brighter each night, and Lyra's laughter echoed through the empty streets, defying the silence that had ruled for so long. Yet beneath it all was a tension, a sense that the fragile peace they had built was not meant to last. Corin often caught Sarai watching the sky at night, her eyes reflecting the faint movements of distant satellites that no longer belonged to either of them. "If they come," he said one evening, "we'll make them see what we've made here." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Or they will take it from us," she whispered. "That is what your kind does best." And though Corin wanted to argue, he found no words strong enough to deny it. The wind carried the metallic scent of a storm forming beyond the horizon, and somewhere deep within the planet, the old system stirred, sensing change. The hum of Damaris, 9 had become a constant presence, low and steady, as if the planet itself had accepted Corin and Sarai as tenants of its bones. But that night, the hum shifted, sharper and more insistent, vibrating through the soles of his boots and the soles of his consciousness alike. He had been repairing a collapsed aerial conduit on the outskirts of the settlement when the first faint flashes appeared on the scanner, a sequence of signatures that didn't belong to the ruins, to the wind, or to the old automated systems. Corin froze, his fingers tightening around the plasma torch. The readings were faint, distant, yet undeniable, intelligent, deliberate, approaching. He returned to the central dome where Sarai was already tending the biogrid, her hands moving in fluid arcs that made the crystalline filaments pulse in response. She noticed the change in his gait before he spoke. "They are coming," he said simply, the words heavier than he expected. Sarai's glow dimmed, her copper eyes narrowing. "Humans?" she asked, though the tone suggested she already knew. "Or scavengers? You cannot tell the difference until it is too late." Satellites picked up distant relay pings. "Not local. corporate, maybe militarized. Whatever it is, it's tracking the signal I accidentally reactivated. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You gave them a trail. He hesitated. I didn't think. You didn't think, she echoed, a whisper that carried the weight of decades of survival. She moved to the central console and interfaced with it directly, her glowing fingers weaving through the alien architecture. The town's systems responded instantly, lights dimming and humming in altered frequencies, airflow accelerating in hidden ducts, energy rerouted to defensive nodes he hadn't yet learned existed. The place was alive, responding to her touch as if it were a living organism defending its last sentient heartbeat. Corin followed her instructions quickly, recalibrating the power grid, sealing sections of the settlement, and reactivating dormant drones buried under centuries of sand. Small, wheeled automata stirred to life in the corners of the domes, their sensors sweeping for movement. They were crude by modern human standards, but to Sarai, they were extensions of the town, part of its self-preservation mechanism. They will try to land, she said, her voice steady but tense. We have time, but not much. Hide the tracks, disrupt the frequencies. Make the place appear dead again. They will not leave without proof. The hours passed in a blur of meticulous activity. Corin moved through the tunnels and upper streets, placing holographic decoys and energy distortions to mimic uninhabitable conditions. Sarai coordinated from the central dome, her presence barely perceptible but impossible to ignore, her hands glowing, her voice low, as though the settlement listened to her alone. Lyra clung to her side, fascinated by the glowing node she manipulated, her eyes wide with the thrill of the unseen mechanisms. By the time the twin moons reached their zenith, the scanners lit up with distant shapes breaking through the upper atmosphere, a formation of sleek human craft, long-range salvagers or corporate surveyors, their sensors searching for any anomaly. Corin crouched behind a collapsed solar array, heart pounding. The drones hummed softly beneath the dust, their optics tracking the approaching vessels. He could see Sarai in the shadows, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that made the alien filaments ripple in response. The ships touched down with a controlled precision, engines stirring up clouds of metallic dust. Figures emerged, clad in exosuits, scanning the ruins with automated instruments and handheld scanners. They expected dereliction, the ruins of a long-forgotten colony. They did not expect the subtle pulse of life beneath their feet, the light that flickered in rhythmic patterns across the domes, or the faint resonance that made their instruments falter. Corin and Sarai watched from the ridge, unseen. He noted the hesitation in the humans' movements, the way their scanners picked up anomalies but couldn't parse them. The Iliari technology, he whispered, almost in awe. It's interacting with their systems. Sarai's gaze was focused, unflinching. Not interacting. Overriding. Our presence here is a signal they cannot understand. The town itself is alive. You only reawaken it, it will protect us if we act in concert. The salvage team approached the central dome, weapons drawn as standard precaution, but their approach was halted abruptly. The ground hummed beneath their boots, subtle vibrations that triggered their exosuit sensors. Lights inside the dome flickered, and from the crystalline structures, a soft wave of harmonic resonance emerged, pulsing through neural circuits of their helmets. Confusion rippled through the team, some of them dropped their devices, others froze, scanning and rescanning instruments that now displayed impossible readings. Sarai stepped forward, fully visible for the first time. She raised her hand, letting the harmonic frequencies of her voice, converted through the town's resonance, flow outward. The sound was layered, melodic, and entirely alien. It struck at the neural implants in the humans' helmets, not harming but demanding attention, triggering instinctive recognition of long-lost alliances encoded in humanity's distant history with the Iliari. Memories the team never lived through stirred in the back of their minds, treaties, collaborations, warnings ignored, and lessons unlearned. The effect was almost spiritual, disorienting and mesmerizing. Corin moved beside her, silent but present. Together, human and Iliari became conduits for the town's living network. The drones stirred, doors sealed and opened at will, lights flickered in patterns that felt purposeful. The humans faltered, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. No weapons were fired. No orders were effective. The settlement had become something other than ruin. Hours passed in tense equilibrium. Eventually, the humans retreated, their systems still resonating with disjointed echoes of the town's signals. Supplies they had brought for salvage remained, but the threat had dissipated without confrontation. Corin exhaled deeply, leaning against the crystalline wall of the central dome. Lyra clung to Sarai, curious eyes wide, sensing the tension and its release. Sarai's voice was calm but firm. They will come again. They always do. But now they know, Damaris, 9 is not empty. They will hesitate before next time. Corin nodded, finally allowing himself to absorb the enormity of what had occurred. For the first time, he felt that the settlement wasn't just a place to hide, it was a partner, a living entity. And the bond between human and Iliari, tenuous and fragile, had grown into something far stronger than either of them had anticipated. The twin moons sank behind the dunes, and the town hummed softly beneath their light, alive in a way that no human, or Iliari, could have fully predicted. The night was quiet, but it carried the promise of storms to come, and with them, the need for vigilance, ingenuity, and unity between species that history had once set against each other. The day began with a tense quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the settlement's restored power grid and the faint chatter of the automated drones patrolling the outer perimeter. Corin rose early, moving methodically through the town, inspecting the restored conduits and hydro lines. Each pulse of energy beneath his hands felt alive, responsive, almost sentient. He had learned over the past weeks that Damaris, 9 was more than just a place, it was a being shaped by centuries of neglect, survival, and now, their combined care. Sarai joined him at the edge of the central square, Lyra skipping along behind, leaving faint bioluminescent footprints in the dust. The child's curiosity had become a mirror for Corin's own fascination. They will come again, Sarai said, her tone calm but edged with caution. The signal you sent will not be ignored indefinitely. Corin nodded, adjusting the targeting sensors on a series of defensive drones he had reactivated overnight. Then we make sure they arrive unprepared, he said. We show them something they weren't expecting. By mid-morning, the first vessels were visible on the horizon, dark silhouettes against the copper-tinged dunes. Corin felt the familiar tension rise, a pulse that matched the energy thrumming beneath his boots. The salvage crew had returned, larger this time, with advanced exosuits and heavier scanning equipment. They expected a ghost town, derelict and lifeless. Instead, what awaited them was alive, responsive, and aware. As the ships touched down, Corin and Sarai coordinated seamlessly. She moved through the town like a conductor, her hands tracing arcs in the air, coaxing the crystalline filaments to reactivate the hidden systems. Doors opened and closed in impossible synchrony, lights pulsed in rhythmic patterns across the domes, and drones emerged from the shadows, scanning and reporting as though the town itself had willed them into action. The human team approached cautiously, their helmets scanning for anomalies. But the instruments began to fail almost immediately. Readings fluctuated wildly, some sensors reporting impossible energy spikes, others showing corridors filled with shadows that did not exist. Confusion spread through the team, an invisible hand disrupting their training, their instincts, and their expectation of control. Sarai stepped fully into view this time, her skin shimmering with bioluminescent threads that pulsed in resonance with the town. She raised one hand, and a low harmonic tone began to resonate through the settlement. It was not sound in the conventional sense, it penetrated neural implants, bypassed exosuit filters, and struck directly at the cognitive centers of the humans' minds. Memories flickered, images of long-forgotten treaties, forgotten alliances, warnings ignored. The team faltered, some freezing mid-step, others lowering weapons, their senses overwhelmed by signals they could not parse. Corin moved beside her, silent but integral, his hands working over the auxiliary controls that bridged human technology and Iliari systems. Together, They amplified the town's resonance, channeling it into precise frequencies that disoriented the newcomers without harming them. It was a dance of energy, computation, and biological attunement, the result of weeks of observation and cooperation. Minutes stretched into tense hours. The salvage crew attempted to advance, but the settlement refused entry. Automated doors closed in their path, holographic decoys shifted their apparent location, and drones guided by the town's living network created false corridors. Confusion escalated to frustration, and frustration to hesitation. What had been a mission of collection and exploitation had become something incomprehensible. Finally, one of the senior team members attempted direct communication, calling out over the comm array. "This is Corporate Salvage Unit ART-214. Identify yourself. We mean no harm." Sarai's response was subtle but profound. She allowed her voice to blend with the town's harmonic frequency, creating a resonance that the human team could perceive only as a deep, instinctive understanding, a recognition of history, a warning of consequence, and a silent insistence that this place was no longer theirs to claim. Their neural systems interpreted the signal as both authority and threat, and the team hesitated, indecision freezing their actions. Corin watched the crew's hesitation, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and triumph. The humans had expected ruins, they had expected obedience from the lifeless, but they faced something they could not dominate. He realized in that moment that Damaris 9 had become more than shelter, more than refuge. It was a force that demanded respect, shaped by both human ingenuity and alien legacy. Hours later, the crew withdrew, leaving behind supplies they had intended to seize. Their departure was tentative, cautious, their instruments still flickering with residual interference from the town's systems. Corin exhaled, stepping into the soft glow of the domes, and for the first time allowed himself to feel the enormity of their accomplishment. Lyra wandered close, giggling at the playful flickers of light that followed her footsteps, unaware of the danger they had just faced. Sarai placed a hand on Corin's shoulder, her glow dimming to a softer, steady rhythm. "This will not be the last time," she said. "They will return, and they may come with more than curiosity next time." "We'll be ready," he replied, the words firm, almost instinctive. "We've built something worth protecting, and we won't abandon it." The night settled over Damaris 9 with a renewed calm, the twin moons casting long shadows over the revitalized settlement. The hum of the town beneath their feet was steady now, confident, as though aware of its own strength. Corin looked out over the domes, the wind carrying the faint metallic scent of the dunes, and realized that the ghosts he had expected had been replaced not by emptiness, but by life, by vigilance, by a bond that neither human nor Iliari could have foreseen. In the quiet, Sarai's soft luminescence illuminated Lyra's face as she laughed, chasing at drifting dust motes that glowed faintly in her presence. And for the first time, Corin felt that the town, and its last inhabitants, had truly begun anew. The days that followed the salvage crew's departure were quieter, but the tension never fully lifted. Corin and Sarai moved through the town with a deliberate calm, tending to systems, repairing minor damages, and reinforcing the subtle defenses that had saved them. Each corner of the settlement seemed to pulse with renewed life, lights flickered in patterns that suggested awareness, airflow adjusted itself as if anticipating their movements, and drones moved almost playfully, weaving between the structures with precision. Lyra ran ahead of them, her laughter blending with the hum of the living town. The child's presence seemed to accelerate the restoration, her bioluminescent traces leaving faint, lingering patterns across the floor that slowly integrated into the settlement's network. Corin had taken to wandering the perimeter at dawn, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning threats, but with each passing day, he began to notice subtler changes. The dunes themselves seemed to shift less violently, dust storms less frequent, and the faint metallic resonance of the planet's crust harmonized with the town's energy. It was as if Damaris 9 itself was acclimating to their presence, learning to breathe again after centuries of neglect. Sarai joined him one morning at the ridge overlooking the valley. The twin moons were sinking behind distant dunes, painting the sky in layers of orange and crimson. "We have made it far," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of memory and survival. But there are always others who will come seeking to take what we have built. We've survived before, Corin replied. We'll survive again. This place isn't just a ghost anymore, it's alive. And it knows we are its stewards now. The statement was almost prophetic. That afternoon, as Corin repaired a misaligned solar array, he detected a faint signal on the long-range scanner, an exploratory probe, not human, but unfamiliar, drifting in from deep space. Sarai observed the data beside him, her copper eyes narrowed. Another species, she said. Perhaps curious, perhaps opportunistic. But unlike humans, they will sense the town's rhythm and respect it. When the probe approached the settlement, it did not trigger alarms, nor did it scan aggressively. Instead, it hovered briefly at the edge of the dunes, its surface shimmering as it responded to the ambient harmonic frequencies. Sarai's hand glowed faintly as she interfaced with the town's resonance, and a soft pulse of recognition passed through the alien craft. It emitted a low hum and departed, leaving the settlement undisturbed. Corin watched the retreating silhouette with a mix of relief and wonder. The town had communicated on its own, and life beyond their fragile enclave had acknowledged it. Inside the central dome, the restored hydroponics glowed with a gentle green light. Trays of algae and genetically adapted crops flourished, the first truly viable harvest in decades. Corin and Sarai worked side by side, transferring seedlings from one module to another, adjusting nutrient flows, and integrating Eliari growth patterns with human engineering. Lyra skipped between them, carrying small containers of water and humming a tuneless melody. For the first time, Corin allowed himself to envision a future here, one that included laughter, learning, and continuity rather than mere survival. As night fell, the town's lights pulsed softly in rhythm with the faint resonance of the planet. Sarai activated a console projecting holographic archives from both Eliari and human histories. They pored over maps of old trade routes, star charts, and historical records of the settlements that had once dotted the Perseid Rim. We can expand, she said thoughtfully, reconnect the scattered outposts. Not to reclaim, but to restore balance. Teach others what it means to coexist with this world, rather than exploit it. Corin nodded, imagining a network of living settlements, each a blend of human ingenuity and Eliari attunement, connected across the barren expanses. And we'll do it together, he said. Not as conquerors, but as caretakers. Over the next weeks, they fortified the settlement further. The fusion cores were stabilized with dual human and Eliari oversight, atmospheric regulators maintained perfect balance, and the defensive drones learned subtle new behaviors under Sarai's guidance. Lyra absorbed everything, growing into her own unique awareness of both species' knowledge and rhythms. By the time the final sun of the season dipped below the horizon, Damaris, 9 had transformed from ghost town to living habitat, self-sustaining and resilient. In the quiet hours, Corin often walked alone to the highest ridge, watching the stars bloom across the black sky. The twin moons reflected off the dunes like pale guardians. He thought of all the settlements that had fallen silent, all the lives that had been abandoned. But here, in this unlikely convergence of human and Eliari, the past had not claimed victory. Life had returned, stronger and wiser. Sarai joined him eventually, standing shoulder to shoulder. Lyra leaned against her, eyelids heavy with sleep. Do you think they will ever understand? Corin asked quietly. They may try, Sarai replied. But understanding is not what matters. Survival, growth, and memory, these are what endure. This town will carry us forward, and in time, perhaps the others will learn as well. Corin smiled faintly, looking down at the glowing paths where Lyra had wandered, where the drones hummed softly in the shadows, and where the town itself seemed to breathe. The settlement had survived humans, storms, and neglect. It would survive them as well. And in that survival, there was hope, not just for them, but for the possibility of something far greater, a world reclaimed, not through domination, but through care, cooperation, and the fragile, luminous bond between species. As night settled fully, the town glowed gently, alive in ways both visible and unseen. Corin, Sarai, and Lyra moved through its streets, their footsteps echoing softly across restored corridors. For the first time, the settlement was not a ghost, not a memory, it was a beginning. And beneath the twin moons of Damaris, 9, a new dawn, slow and inevitable, began to rise.